go for it and see what happens. So, Josh, you had an interesting provocation around something that a process that you would want to put liberating structures towards. And I read some of it and got a little bit of the gist of it, but I would love to put you on the spot and give us some description of the thing that you're talking about and see what type of insight the group can come up with for how we can turn that into a participatory process.
Sounds fantastic, mate. Yeah, so I was recently at Meta Forum, which is hosted by some of Stafford Beer's students. And for those unaware, Stafford Beer was one of the great cyberneticists of our time. He consulted with very high levels of organization as well as the Venezuelan government. And he was trying to help build this project called CyberSyn there to balance economic, social, governmental forces and so forth. Essentially trying to untangle the big thread of webs that every nation state deals with. And so over time, his lineage essentially fell under consultancy capture. So the tools used were very, very high level emancipatory structures, FYI, Jeremy. So meta liberation structures of huge scope, but they fell under consultancy capture and IP brands and all of this stuff. And so what he's doing is we have these kind of geometries that you can see in the background on my wall there, where the nodes represent groups and the edges represent people. And by asking 3 questions, or convening people for each group and running the process 3 times, they ask, what's important, what can we do, and then what should we do? And from there, you build up group information symmetry so that everybody knows exactly what needs to be done, has autonomy to go off and do it, and then at some point in the future, come back together and run the process again. And so my main prompt here is how to get these tools of knowledge and emancipation out of the corporate hands and consultancy capture and bring this to the grassroots in a more effective manner so that people may run them for themselves, use a playbook and just run them, for instance, in the Innovation Academy, or build their own for the group size that matters. Is that clear enough as a kind of context setting, Jeremy? Does anybody have questions? Or?
Well, that's why we have clarifying questions. So we throw that to the group, man. What do we want to know more information about?
Yeah, I didn't quite catch what's the problem.
Well, I would suggest that the problem is that most groups seem to eventually blow up due to lack of information symmetry, as in there is usually the haves and the have-nots, the bosses that know what's going on and the workers that don't know what's going on. And that builds tensions that causes schisms. And so I think that's a problem at the global scale and needs resolution. Particularly, I think the grassroots need this, less so the consultants and the high levels at the top. So how to bring the tools of the highest levels of consultancy to the grassroots is the problem.
Josh, could you shed more light on information symmetry?
Yes, and this question is exactly a point in case in that I know something that you do not. And so how to use these tools, how do I pass that knowledge on to you to create information symmetry between us, as in you know the same thing that I know and can thus act on it.
And so it sounds like your goal is you have sort of discovered or landed upon this broad method, and you want to spread it from where it's currently being used, being mostly in consultancy, to grassroots organizations.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah. How to bring the treasure to the masses.
Tell me about it, my dude. Tell me about it. Um, ooh. Mm, and I guess where have you started so far, or where has there been perhaps green shoots of adoption? Where's it been tried and used?
Well, it's been used for the last 50 years at the very high levels of government and consultancies in software firms and this kind of stuff, often oil and gas and these kinds of places, not for regenerative industries, let's say. And so where have I actually found it and started to use it? Well, I have found it at Metaforum through Stafford's lineage, because actually I believe he was trying to bring this to the world as well. It's just kind of stagnated a bit. I've also found it in H3 University, of which I've been attending the last 4 years, but actually practicing it is what I'm trying to move into. And so finding groups that actually want to subscribe to a liberating structure or a process like this and see what's generated as a result of such a integration is what I'm trying to move into. And I'm applying this with commonhack.xyz and the leading events into that with my friend Tom, who's organizing a lot of that stuff.
Cool, cool.
Just another clarifying question. I'm just curious, because you said it has been used by consultants in the high level spaces for so many years. I'm just curious, how does it work practically?
Practically, so I kind of need a little bit more of a pointer of what you're asking, but I can get really meta theoretical if you like and try to answer that question. I just like to scope it a little bit if that's possible. So where has it been used and how does it work? So in answering the how's it work question, geometries create symmetries. And so this is how information flows, is you're structuring the information flow with a particular geometry. And by that, then information can propagate to everybody within that geometry. And so the nodes, the stickers on this image, for example, they are groups that are coming together. And then there are edges, which are people in the groups. And so each person in that geometry has 7 groups, but obviously different geometries have different structures. And so the people in group numbers vary. And so that's what it is and how it's used. But then the overall framing is to enable people. So that's dependent on the groups that are convened. So the main 3 questions, because the groups are assembled 3 times, are what's important, what can we do, what should we do? And from there, it's disassembled and everybody goes off and does stuff.
You said what's important, what should we do, and what could we do?
What can we do, followed by what should we do? The sequence is important because you have to get all the options out first and then pick the important options.
Okay. Thanks.
Maybe one more question I have.
Please.
When doing this activity, does it require like a facilitator to moderate the flow, or anyone can do it? Does it require like prior experience? Can anyone do it, or it has to be one person?
I think it needs at least one person that understands what's happening so that things can be kept on track. But if the group has experience with it, I believe it can be self-organizing. And so this is why writing the playbooks becomes important to me, because then the whole group can know what they're doing and there isn't a power asymmetry. Everybody has equal power in that regard.
Okay, great.
I think this gives us some amount of information to start with. And what I would say is, Josh, go ahead and importantly listen while you mute yourself and turn off your webcam. And the crowd and I will chop it up. Feel free to take notes. I'll be taking notes here in a doc that I can also send you as well, but take your own notes. So, oh, wise crowd, what are some of the things that come up to you? We've got a pretty broad goal, and I think there's also an interesting, more narrow goal that is around the playbook as well. That could be interesting to sort of put some structures to. But what comes up to mind to you guys? What do you guys notice? What seems salient? And what advice might we have for Josh?
Well, I could go first. I think since he said this is a tool that has been used for very many years and it's working and it has a playbook, I think to bring it down to the grassroots, maybe we could consider maybe like having like ambassadors, people who reach out to different stakeholders in the grassroots organizations, and then they introduce to them this tool, they do a demo with them, and then maybe like people can be selected who are interested in learning more how the tool works, and then they can be given more training to be the facilitators in that particular community. And then after he goes to another community, does the same, engages groups of people, does a demo, and then those who are interested, they are taken on. So over a time, it can become like, I've forgotten the right word, but it can be like a fellowship kind of program where different people who are ambassadors are using it and advocating for its use in more and more spaces. And also capturing like short video testimonials, maybe like 1-2 minutes, where someone just shares the experience, how that tool worked for them, and which groups of people they recommend can be able to use that tool. And they are captured in short of testimonials and shared on different platforms. That's what I would think.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I could go next. So Josh, I'm sharing in the chat a website. I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but you could just read through it. For participatory rural appraisal tools, these are tools that connect a lot with the local people and using language that they understand, not complex terms that they do not understand. But these tools, if you could do a cocktail of the sacred geometrical patterns and these tools, I think you could come up with something interesting that would engage this one works a lot with the on-ground local people. Most of in Africa, in an African setting of mine here, who have not gone to school, who don't understand English, but they understand stones, they understand the tree, they understand soil, you know, the resources that are nearby them. So if you blend that with this and come up with something interesting, I would be curious to see how it goes. Yep, that's my. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else? What comes up for me is around niches. Is finding, it sounds like this project that Josh is talking about and my project regarding liberating structures share a lot of sort of common DNA in being quite participatory process and trying to spread those. What has been helpful for me is identifying like a quite narrow and very specific niche of communities to start with. So rather than thinking about like basically these three questions that he's describing, what's important, what can we do, what should we do, like the possibilities are sort of endless of what you could approach with these three questions. So finding a very, very specific place to be like the first, not the first, but like a very, the tip of the spear in terms of intervention seems, has been very helpful for me. I really like, James, also your suggestion around blending this sort of pattern of interaction is, I think, what I describe, what I understand, and other methodologies to sort of see, hey, how does this thing that that Josh has got a piece of combine and blend with other tools, which could be a nice place to help also thinking about the once more this aspect of community. If I think, not that this is a good example, but if I think about Scrum Masters, like Scrum Masters is a very specific community. How might I be able to translate this thing I've got into the language of this community so that it becomes more salient and more digestible to them? There's also something around, like, I think this is what I recognize is that for a lot of people, what he's describing is going to seem very abstract. That it's really hard to grasp for many people, like the flow of information that he's describing. Like I've got a map for that, but for most people, it's really hard, and figuring out this playbook that breaks it down into like step one, do this thing, step two, do this next thing, like that really puts it into a very granular, like this, like dance moves, right? Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot, is an important move that helps it go from like big, like lots of moving parts to like very, very straightforward. I think the design language around liberating structures might be useful, and could also provide a good initial use case by making that translation again from the broad general into the sort of language and terminology of liberating structures. That might help. So liberating structures are literally an instruction or a set of instructions about how to have a conversation. And each set of instructions includes 5 different design elements. So the first one is how participation is distributed. So what roles are there? How does basically everybody participate in this game? How are groups formed, with some assumption that there will be subgroups. He mentioned that they are, but exactly how are groups formed? And I know that there's a lot of different ways that you could conceivably form groups, but just what's an initial application to make it tangible? The third element is time boxes. So what are the containers of time that groups discuss the subject matter and content? The fourth design element is what we call the invitation, the question or the prompt that drives discussion within those groups, within these windows of time. And the fifth, Jesus, I cannot count today. The fifth design element is around how you would arrange materials and space in order to go through this process. So would you want, if you think about this being in a physical space, would you want groups sitting together in circles or sitting at tables or sitting You know, would they need Post-its or notes? You know, just all of the stuff, the physical infrastructure that might be required. Thank you for sharing the link to liberatingstructures.com/design-elements. So once more, taking this process and sort of breaking it down, and each one of these, making sure that for the whole process, you have descriptions for all 5 of these design elements, can make it really clear. That becomes a sort of dry technical document, but at least some of the Liberating Structures community, you know, us nerds, has a feel for, oh, I know how to read these dry technical documents, and I can make sense of this stuff. That might not be exactly the goal to create a playbook. For the playbook, I think it's usually interesting to think about both these first subset, these interaction mechanisms, then the question, then the materials or the artifacts that are needed. But at any rate, that might provide one particular lens. Anybody else?
Oh, my name is Magdalena. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
English is very bad. Sorry for this. So you say make transparent to the participants. When you start the facilitator work in group, works in their class, they work for years, they work. You try to bring in a project, a new let's say, approach, how to get these people that work in a classical way is to make those, yes, you bring in those five, the facilitator, to let know the 5 steps you just mentioned. Show them you are needed. That I am going to do it by myself. No, people, please, those 5 steps will manage the process. Is that right? Is it the thing you said? Thank you.
That was hard to hear, but what came out is, I think, a question around who manages the process. And what jumped out at me is, I think, if I were Josh, I would manage the process, to like really hold people's hands and ensure that there was somebody who sort of had the overview end to end, like to sort of start in that facilitative role. And what also jumped out as perhaps wisdom in hearing you, Magdalena, was finding some project that was just starting. So rather than finding some group that was already doing something and it was going either well or it was falling apart, find something that is really in a seed phase, in its infancy, so that you might have the opportunity to start in this way and guide the thing. That might be easier than offering it as an intervention into something that's already sort of gone sideways, because there's a lot of sort of karma and legacy there. And it might be easier to sort of offer effectively what's a culture, right? Any structure is the basis upon which culture is formed. So starting with that structure might be easier than introducing it, and creating that culture might be easier than making a change of culture. So I don't know if that was your exactly your question, Magdalena, but that was the sense that I made of it.
Thank you. Yes, I think that you pointed out the answer very well. And I think that now that I know those 5 steps, it's not an intervention by one person. It's clear to the group of people that it's a process that they can take part in, which is very important, because when something like this urban planning approach I'm talking about, which is totally new, and no one has like a clue, even not me, it's better to show those 5 steps in order to calm them down and tell them, look, you are the ones who will create it, and I'm just in those 5. So now I am happy. I think this, yeah, because yes, because it's not, it's, if it's an intervention by one person only, this makes everyone nervous. But when the people see that there's a whole process, the 5 steps, then they get calmer, you know? This is a very good tool, I think.
Thank you. And I want to, there's something about like, I want to give us the opportunity of having something that's maybe quite tangible. If I think about these 3 questions, like this question of what's important, that seems to track both to 9 whys as being a specific liberating structure that could be useful in that instance, what seems meaningful, significant, and important. I think for all of these questions, a most minimum viable pattern of liberating structures could just be 1, 2, 4 all. So if I just went into a group and I said, what's important? First 1 minute of silent reflection, a brief one-on-one conversation, a small group interaction of 4, and then we come together to cross-pollinate across those small groups. 1, 2, 4 all for each of these questions. Next question, what can we do? Next question, what should we do? Could be a good enough place to sort of start and ensure that participation is quite evenly distributed across a group of relatively small size or large size. For each question, though, what's important seems to track well to 9 whys, as well as something like appreciative interviews. That's a question that uses past experience qualifying or personal narrative inquiry to sort of reveal around what's important, but also conversation cafes, working generally speaking in rounds where you sort of pass a talking object and leave some space for an unstructured group discussion. This is a very mechanical process that you could just put each one of these questions into a set of conversation cafes. The question around what can we do as interesting connotations of getting all of the options out as an initial move. 1, 2, 4 all works brilliantly for that in terms of just like brainstorming and getting lots of information out. Ecocycle planning is one possible structure. It's a little bit bigger that could help use a visual artifact of getting all the information out. But I think 1, 2, 4 all certainly seems sufficient. This question around what should we do, that is a little trickier because I would want either some way, that's where Ecocycle becomes a little bit more of an advantage because it sorts information and looks especially for interventions of what's not working, both in moving ideas that are not getting enough energy or time or resources into an active state, or by stopping things that are sort of long in the tooth and moving those into creative destruction. So that offers 2 particular points, thanks Arabella, around a possible solution for what should we do. There's also 2510 crowdsourcing is a specific liberating structure that sort of does a decentralized decision making in organizing all of the possible ideas and getting people to sort of do a very limited type of voting on a scale of 1 to 5 for just this limited subset of ideas. I think that question, what should we do, is really the hard question in this process or method. There will be a lot of different opinions about how to do governance and make decisions. Like deep democracy or sociocracy has a lot of information about the circle method and participatory process. I really like 2510 crowdsourcing because it doesn't require us to agree. We can use this decentralized and distributed process to basically rank ideas based on a limited evaluation. That part, though, is the trickier bit in the large scheme of things. And then the question that comes up in addition to this, in addition to these three, which is, okay, once we've decided what should we do, is the age-old question of how are we going to do it? There's a book called Strategic Doing by Ed Morrison, who describes 4 very similar questions. He describes, what could we do? What's our vision? What could we do? What should we do? And how are we going to do it? As the essential patterns in his work with the Agile Leadership Lab, blah, blah, blah. He's done a bunch of grassroots community organizing. So that might be an interesting resource to look at and compare notes with this process that Josh has got. But I feel like I'm rambling and this is a lot of information. So I would invite Josh to come back and tell us what he thinks of our consultation and what he might take away from it.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for just sharing your leads and resources to begin with. It's beautiful to hear what's also available. And I guess I don't see any of this stuff as mutually exclusive, in the sense we share a good friend, Lawrence, who's very interested in play. And so for me, the meta question is really how to bring all of these various group activities into cohesion and coalescence. And so I was actually thinking about the nodes being play groups that he organizes, and connecting those up in this more structured format so that people can bring back their learnings into the wider group, which then gives rise or nods to what you were talking about there, Jeremy, in the sense that liberating structures is very resonant with all of this. And so the numerous pattern, like the 9 whys or the 1, 2, 4 alls, being useful for the single node gatherings that can be spread across the wider field of action and brought together again afterwards in a plenary. And so, yeah, this all feels very complementary. And specifically then, how are we going to do it comes to mind. I guess there's a sense of what to do. Obviously, we're going to need to get a bunch of groups moving and share these different practices within those groups, and then how to bring that all together in a more structured way so that they find resonance between each other. So inter-group coordination becomes the finger pointed at the direction, and how are we going to do it arises for me, which is a beautiful prompt. I guess I've got some other notes that I can reflect on, but I'll stop there just for a moment. And if anybody wants to just talk to those shared points, that would be great.
Yeah, when I think about the scene in the communities in the projects that I'm sort of integrating in, I think the turn is one, like relatively, like in the big scheme of things, sort of high frequency. It's a sort of project that we're doing on a quarter by quarter basis. And we already have different communities, so far, here in Amsterdam, Brussels, Berlin, and now Bangalore sort of jumping into the equation. So yeah, shout out to Rishi, fucking crushing it, feeding 150 humans. Yeah. So that's one particularly potential place. What I'm also aware of is that we're organizing a bit of a participatory process festival with Wise Crowds, and that might be an opportunity that could make sense at the end of July to come and run folks through, a prototype of, hey, this is the process that you're sort of out here advocating. I think the type of nerds that show up to that would be down to explore this particular possibility space. Yeah. And then it's interesting. So I think generally I really come back to find spaces that are relatively nascent that might just be, I think the Turn is a good space because we're just now sort of a year into this repetitive process, and we don't have anything explicit coordination structure currently in place. So that could be a good fit to say, well, do we want to try this game to give it a go, right?
That's a beautiful lead, and I would love to play with you guys at the end of July. Please hit me up with information about that, and see if we can seed something that people may wish to take up.
So if someone who knows who I'm talking to could share that in the chat, that would be amazing.
And
curious to see how the session would go, the prototype.
Yeah, man, me too. So I just want to also say thanks to the other participants in the conversation as well. There are a number of ideas that I'll just repeat back that I took note of during the consultation, just because I thought they were all important points. And so ambassadors reaching out and evangelizing at the grassroots orgs, that is a beautiful suggestion. We definitely need those. Training to facilitate fellowship programs and advocacies through actually practice, trying it, experiencing what the process is, and learning while then going on to apply afterwards feels like a great suggestion of keeping the system running or keeping the process running so that it spreads amongst more people, as well as the testimonials. It's very easy to forget about those little pieces that really help bring about buy-in, and encourage and inspire others to join in. So yeah, I also heard simple language, not a speciality of mine, I must say, but I appreciate the pointers. Always trying, forever failing, but doing my best. So thank you for that note. Always good to have reminders. Niching down hard was a good one, and finding niches that already have sympathetic resonance, such as the Liberating Structure space or holocracy, sociocracy, and other methodologies, the Agile, Scrum Masters, and translating into their language to make these accessible to people that already have a process and a culture, but can assimilate then the kind of more macroscopic view into their own cultures or the macro processes. That's a great idea. The what, how, and why, particularly the dance moves metaphor, I think is beautiful. So I appreciate that. And yeah, obviously the more specifics around rules, groups, time boxes, invitations, questions, prompts, materials, design spaces. Those are very key elements. I appreciate that. In particular, I think about my friend who kind of built a narrative structure for participatory spaces. he was he is, I should say, a Samkhya practitioner, and so builds very beautifully. But I guess it's the more narrative structure that sits on these more functional or mechanical contraptions that I'm talking about. And so synthesizing those feels productive as well. As well as just seeding, finding places at the starting moment rather than, so starter cultures comes to mind, rather than trying to make an intervention. And I particularly appreciate Magdalena's comment on interventions, in that everybody becomes nervous by them, but an articulated, explicit process helps quell those concerns, because people know upfront, transparently, what they're buying into. I think that's one of the big selling points of these rather large geometric structures, in that they can be seen and played with even as little models in the hand, a la Buckminster Fuller. But having very, very clear and explicit processes, both at the granular levels as well as the macro structure, I think is a huge selling point here. So thank you very much, Magdalena, for those shouts. And yeah, just love to all. It's been a pleasure jamming. And thank you very much for the clarifying questions and prompts that you've shared today.
Our pleasure. This is the vibe of Wise Crowds. And LS just posted in the chat the link to the event in July. So get yourself signed up, register, tell your friends to come hang out and nerd out with us. We took our sweet time with that. So we have about 20 minutes left on this call. Does somebody else come with a design brief or some question, situation, or challenge they would like consultation on? We can speed run the process as well.
I have one.
Awesome, James. Give us the game.
So I have, so the situation is I have a training, and I'm going to be meeting trainers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to be training them to be able to train their participants on the use of a specific curriculum in personal development. So my aim or my overall goal is that each of those participants are able to facilitate that curriculum effectively when they go back to their community. So my question is, how can I use Wise Crowds to facilitate, to engage participation in this training?
Clarifying question. I guess I want to know a little bit more about the sort of content of the training and who's going to participate.
So it's a training of trainers, a TOT.
Ah,
Yeah. And so the participants are supposed to be able to teach or to train their students using the curriculum which I'm going to be giving them. So basically, the main mode of what's going to be happening throughout the day, it's like a three-day training, is they're going to be, of course, I'm going to, at the introduction, I'll introduce the whole concept of the curriculum, the purpose, the goal, everything, and then take them through the curriculum. So we're going to have sessions where we're going through, we're reading through the curriculum. So we read through the session plan. People ask questions where there is no clarity, I answer, like, then we move on to the next. So we go through the session plan. And then after going through the session plan, I have the participants mock the sessions. They mock the session and then get feedback from us. And so the theory will be going through the session plan, and then the practicals will be mocking the session plan and getting feedback.
okay. I think that helps. Anybody else?
Yeah, I have a clarifying question. Will you be applying the curriculum that the trainers will be using to train the trainers themselves? So will the same structure be used recursively to train the trainers? Is that clear?
Yes, that's what I'm planning. Although I'm not sure how it will work, but that's what I'm planning.
Do you have?
So it's kind of like my what I'm envisioning is to kind of like do demos, demonstrate like a certain segment of the session for people to see how it happens when it comes alive in a live session with participants. And then, get feedback, questions, and then it's themselves to do after the participants. They mock it as I watch, and then I give feedback. So the plan is we go through the curriculum theoretically, then I do a demos of it. They see how it's done, ask questions, and then after they do the demos while I'm watching, and their colleagues are also watching and give, then we have feedback. So we'll have mock sessions happen at different points. Sometimes we'll be having on the third and fourth day, we'll be having mock sessions happening in parallel.
Yeah,
Go for it. I've got
okay, I have a clarifying question. So are those trainers interested in the training, or is it like a corporate direction?
They're interested. They applied for the training themselves out of individual interest.
Okay. Are they paying for it, or is it sponsored?
It's sponsored.
And how long does it take, the training?
4 days.
Okay.
And the method or the sort of process that they're going to be training, how long is that training itself?
It's also 4 days.
Okay. Interesting. Anybody else?
I have a further question that goes a level deeper on my previous question, which is, will people bring materials for the trainers being trained to demo? Because if they don't have materials, it may be hard for them to demo. And so have you thought about the materials they'll need for them to be able to demo themselves?
Yes, their materials, which will be provided.
And is this going to be an in-person thing or a remote thing?
In person.
Cool. I think that gives us enough to get started with. I've got a couple ideas. So James, you know how this works. Listen while you mute yourself and turn off the webcam. Who's got ideas?
Yes, I can jump in a little bit. And so, yeah, it's a fun situation to be in, training the trainers. But that's always tough, because there's kind of, you've got to teach them to teach, and I guess that kind of propagates down the line a little bit. And so bringing the materials, for example, or making sure that they have enough materials to demonstrate through practical action, which it sounds like you're teaching the curriculum that you're bringing them, sounds very wholesome. So those are my first initial thoughts, and it sounds like you're on a very good trajectory already, James. And so, whoosh, big love. I hope that it goes really well. Knowing exactly how you're structuring it over the 4 days is probably useful. It sounds again like you already have that down. Yeah, there are a few other things that came to mind, but they've slipped away again. So I'll stop here for now and pass over to somebody else while they arrive.
And in particular, what structures, or would liberating structures or otherwise, jump out as being potentially relevant? to help James out here.
So I think that because the engagement is the key concept, even if they have applied voluntarily, it should be important to start with a purpose. Maybe it could also be a homework, if possible, so that you also have people investing a bit of time before the course, so they will have a way, like a kind of commitment, an extra commitment, because they have already invested some effort. So they don't want, it's like a bias from people. Like after you have invested some time, you will not, I mean, you will tend not to lose that time. So I think that will be one very important aspect. And for that, you can use the 9 whys. And the additional structures that could be useful for you to like to do the, like to think about engagement is to probably ask for yourself like TRIZ, like how do you make it a nightmare, a super boring, or as Jeremy will call it, how do you make it hell? And then think about what of those things in a, like in a self-reflection way you are doing. Also try to be compassionate with yourself, so don't be too rough with you, but then try to think on what can you offer from those findings, applying like 15% solutions afterwards. And what you can also try to do is to have a very, let's say, begin like a very emotional beginning for people. So for example, start with heard, seen, and respected, so that people can connect from the beginning and have some bonds, because that could also help the people that it's involved. For that, you can also do appreciative interviews. I will also probably invite Jeremy to do a celebrity interview, for example. And I think that in general, you can also use the purpose to practice. And yeah, like that the purpose to practice will help you to organize or to reshape the content in a way that would make sense regarding how the journey of the people is going, and also for yourself. And yeah, like I think that's something that could work. On the other hand, what you can also ask when people apply for your training could be what I need from you. It could be either at the beginning, or it could be also at the end, because if you want them to apply it after they are using it, then they could also have the support of this network of trainers that were trained to continue spreading it. So it could be like another option in that sense.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Just jumping off that, what came up for me was, yeah, the catalyst moment. What is the call to action that starts to get things in motion? How does that lead towards shared sense making, and what is the connection between them? Those are just key questions to get the ball rolling on the first half of the session, perhaps, or first 2 days. What are those workshops that get things moving, create connection, and bring about sense making?
Thank you. One of the things that jumps out to me might be to throw a monkey wrench in the blueprint that James brought in. Is like, I get the idea of like going through the material and then doing your mock-ups, but I think it might be much more fun if we do the role play, so to speak, as we go through the material, so we can think about each step of the process. And on the basis of that, make sense of things. So one of the structures, no matter what, to do the mock-up and to do some of the role playing is improv prototyping. So to think about like improvisational theater as your sort of general mode of role play, you know, to lean into the yes and, as well as I like this notion actually of around using perhaps wise crowds or a stripped down version of wise crowds to ask or to ask small groups to make sense of and wrestle with the content. So while it might be, I got the sense that James wanted to sort of start by going through the information and then getting clarifying questions. I might give people like more time for silent reflection or to work in small groups to try and make sense of the theory or the content, and then get their clarifying questions, and then go through the present, you know, connect the dots on what was sort of missing from the information or what wasn't quite clear. That is more challenging for participants because they really have to like put their head down and figure stuff out without any explanation. But that increased effort also makes the stuff stick a bit better and reduces the responsibility on James to first clarify things and then get questions. By reversing that flow of only clarifying the things that people weren't able to figure out themselves, then the lecture becomes much more specific and narrow, which some people like. Some people also, like, I like to talk, so I get that, you know, that's less showtime, but that can be a big benefit also from the perspective of the language came up earlier in the session, being able to use the words actually in the questions that people brought up rather than just an explanation helps ensure that that we're avoiding jargon and helping information really stick by making it in a relevant way. So improv prototyping is one way that comes up. I think the idea of using wise crowds as a structure to ask questions into the group makes sense. If I thought about every block as a celebrity interview as well, every block of theory, that sort of makes sense of like, hey, you know, I'm not going to tell you any information, so to speak, you know, but I am going to respond to your questions for clarification. And, you know, asking the question, especially what portion of this information is the least clear to you, sort of sets the expectation that some things are going to be clear, and the things that are the least clear should be the things that we should focus our time and attention on. So that jumps out. Anybody else?
I'll just and say that LGN, letting people figure out what the problems they're wrestling with at the beginning, is a really great way of enabling the information to stick, because then the relevance is seen. Sorry, didn't mean to jump in. Go ahead.
I was wondering, would it be off topic to talk about it more from the business perspective?
Tell me more.
Well, I think as long as he's talking about training programs, the anchoring point, the call to action for people coming into that, even if they are trainers themselves, is who's going to care about it, right? So I don't know if he's worked on standardizing some sort of certification or kind of expectations to come out of it. But if you could formalize that, maybe, you know, get some sort of certificate or badge or something, and have that represent this list of expectations or values, he could probably run that by whatever employers are pertinent in the area or whatever companies would care about the training, and get them to not only advise it, but kind of sign on for it and say, oh yeah, we like people that have had this sort of training or that have this sort of certification, which not only starts a dialogue with the companies that would potentially be bringing these people on, but then maybe a dialogue with, he said that they're sponsored events or trainings. So perhaps an opportunity to get sponsors for upcoming events. And as all these companies probably have kind of people involved that have some sort of niche experience, maybe even some sort of guest speaker at a training session could be volunteered, help cover the bases and kind of get a little synergy between you and the people you're training people for.
Thank you. And as we're coming close to our time boundary, I'll ask James to come back and tell us what he thought of his consultation and what stuck out as relevant that he might be able to make use of.
Yes, thank you everyone for those great suggestions. What I've taken away is I like the idea of using wise crowds and impromptu prototyping as a way to get the participants thinking about the content and engaging before I even say anything. So at least it will help me know what they are thinking, and then what are the gaps, and then I'll know how to address those gaps. This is something really I'm taking away. And then reviewing every block of theory, like the modules using the celebrity interview. I think that would be a fun way to see how it goes. Going to read through the concept again and see how that would actually work. Homework, kind of like assignments before people come, I think would really be good also to start get them engaged in the content way before even the training starts. That's something which is also really helpful. And then there was a liberating structure that LS, for lack of a better, had suggested, but I didn't hear it. There's another tool she had started, but I missed it. Then purpose to reshape the content. I think that would really be something also cool. Yeah, this is great. This is great. I'm going to go through the curriculum, look at what is there, and then I see how I could integrate some of these suggestions, and then just play around with the ideas, then maybe even prototype some of the sessions, some of the activities before the training starts, like a week before something. That's what I'm going to do. So I get feedback, and and then iterate the content. But thanks everyone. This was really helpful.
Do you remember what was related the topic that or the structure that I mentioned?
It was, yes, it was it was an introductory structure that you are suggesting. You first mentioned the homework assignment things, then you mentioned another tool to use in the introduction, but I didn't hear it.
Maybe heard, seen, and respected.
Sorry?
Heard, seen, and respected.
Yeah, I think the way you pronounced, I didn't really hear it well. What is it? Just type it in the chat box.
Yeah, I can send a link. But yeah, maybe it's faster here.
Great, this is cool. Okay. Thank you. So
well, humans.
here.
Well, thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, all humans of all gender identities and persuasions, for hanging out in this Wise Crowds design call from Monday, June the 26th. Next week is going to be the first Monday of the month. So in exchange, instead of doing the Wise Crowds call, we'll be doing the Think Slow Dojo. So that uses the same link. If you've got it in your calendar, you can use the same link to get into that call. Hopefully I can find the link with you as well. The Think Slow Dojo will be a more participatory space. Well, they're all participatory, but it's more of a shared meditative space or a reflective space than our focus here in the design call, which is much more practical by nature. So I hope to see you guys next week. And if not, after that, we'll do the Wise Crowds thing the week after that. So thanks so much for your time, attention, and energy. And we'll see you in the future.
And thank you very much, Jeremy. It was a great afternoon.
My pleasure. Safe travels all.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.